The light stutters on the wall when a voice says something gentle that lands like a blade. I stand still long enough to feel the flickering bulb above us hesitate its dull hum, breaking into uneven pulses that make everyone's faces shift in the half-second rhythm of shadow brightness, shadow again. The room smells faintly of citrus cleaner and old fabric, and every breath feels like it drags the air across the sharp edge of something unspoken. I keep my expression neutral because I'm already aware that someone here is watching for a reaction, some tiny slip that proves whatever theory they've decided about me. The flickering bulb trembles once more and pushes a thin slant of light across my knuckles, turning them pale and cold, and I catch my reflection in the shallow glaze of a framed print on the opposite wall. It warps slightly like I'm being bent at the edges. Maybe that's the point. The group has gathered around the low table, arranged with care drinks positioned too neatly, coasters aligned like someone wanted to impress a stranger. They're all talking in overlapping threads, weaving jokes that sound unsuspiciously warm until my presence forces their tones to soften in that off-key way people use when they're not sure if they want you here. I hear something about work, something about someone's weekend plans, something about a restaurant they all went to together without mentioning it to me. Their eyes dart toward me as if checking whether I caught that last part, but I don't react. I inhale carefully, feeling the faint vibration of the flickering bulb in the skin between my eyes. Someone laughs too loudly, and another voice chases it with a quieter, affirming sound, the kind people use to smooth over tension they've decided to ignore. I feel it in small, exact places. The shift of someone's shoe against the rug, the clink of ice in a glass, the forced brightness in a comment that starts light and ends stiff. These are the moments where atmosphere isn't just background. It's intent disguised as environment. I turn slightly, pretending to adjust my sleeve, and watch how a few of them exchange glances so quick they probably assume they're invisible. Those glances aren't cruel. They're evaluative, the kind you give something you're wondering whether to keep or return. I can tell by the way their mouths tighten before relaxing again. In this light, the tension in the room looks like it's stitched into the air itself. My pulse stays steady because I've learned how to hold myself like a quiet surface of water. Only I can feel the current underneath. Someone asks a soft question, something about how my week has been, and the tone doesn't match the words. It's the kind of tone that implies a test more than interest, an invitation to speak, so they can measure the weight of my answer. I keep it short, not cold but self-contained, and watch how two of them gather that detail like it's confirming something. They look at each other without moving their heads, just a twitch of shared understanding. The flickering bulb skips again, and when the light returns, it casts a narrow band across someone's smile. The edges of their lips curve politely, but their eyes hold the tiniest exhaustion, as if being courteous to me requires effort they aren't committed to sustaining. I notice Ethan across the room leaning against the counter with a posture that looks casual if you don't know him. I do. His shoulders are too stiff. He watches me with an expression I can't decode from this distance, though I try. He smiles when our eyes meet, but it appears late, arriving after the moment where it would have felt natural. The bulb flickers once more brighter this time, and the brief flash catches something else. Someone murmurs, "She seems fine," in a voice too light, and another responds with a half-laugh that doesn't reach the surface. They're not talking about me directly, not in words they'd consider explicit, but the intention threads through the air with the same rhythm as the flickering light. I hear the judgment in the space between syllables. I sense the suggestion that I'm being categorized, weighed, and maybe already filed under something they've decided privately. Replaceable is not said aloud, not yet, but the idea is there, suspended like dust in the flicker. I keep my breathing slow and even, focusing on the soft hum above me. The flickering bulb becomes a clock marking the seconds between each strained kindness offered in my direction. They don't expect me to notice the slight downturn of a mouth or the half-hidden smirk exchanged behind the rim of a glass, but I do. I notice everything. A metallic clink echoes when someone sets a drink down too quickly. I track the sound, follow it to the rigid posture of someone pretending everything is normal. The voice that injured me earlier speaks again something casual and airy, but the memory of the blade-edge tone still hangs in the air. The flickering bulb dims for a few seconds longer than usual, and in that stretch of half-darkness, I feel the energy of the room tighten, like someone holding their breath. When the light returns, someone is looking directly at me with a glance that feels like the beginning of something they haven't decided whether to hide or deliver outright. For now, they choose to hide it. I remain still, letting the uneven shadows fold across my cheekbones. The moment holds quiet and sharpened, and then the bulb flickers one last time, bright enough to reveal a curved smile that doesn't move the eyes behind it, telling me everything the voice hasn't said yet. I'm Avery Malone, 28, a UX designer from Portland, Oregon, and if I had understood the importance of silence earlier, I might have walked into that evening differently. The memory settles in past tense, carrying the weight of days when I still believed Ethan's friends were simply adjusting to me, not measuring me. I remember the way the hallway outside his apartment smelled faintly of pine detergent and winter air, and how I paused before touching the cold doorknob, feeling the metal bite at my fingertips, like a warning I wasn't ready to interpret. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, sensing a quiet on the other side that didn't sound like a room full of people who wanted me there. The knob felt colder than it should have. When I opened the door, my reflection flashed briefly in the side pane glass, blurred at the edges the way reflections tend to be when the light behind you is stronger than the one ahead. Glass reflection catches what no one admits when the room listens too closely. That was the motif seed moment, though I didn't know it then. I stepped inside and found Ethan's friends sitting around the living room, their bodies angled in casual positions, too perfectly arranged to be natural. Tyler lifted a hand in greeting, but his smile held a stiffness that made me pause. Mara looked up from her phone with a polite expression that dipped a little too low before rising again, as if she had to correct it. Leah offered a small wave, and though she looked genuinely kind, even she seemed uncertain of the social temperature. At that time, I told myself they were just tired or distracted. I had met them only a few times, so it made sense that we didn't have an easy rhythm yet. But the way conversations paused when I entered those tiny half-seconds of adjustment felt like being inserted into a scene where everyone already knew their roles and I was still reading the opening lines. Ethan walked toward me with a careful smile, wrapping one arm around my waist. I noticed the small tension in his jaw even then, but I chalked it up to a long day at work. He kissed the top of my head and said everyone was excited to see me. The quick glance he exchanged with Tyler after saying it didn't match his tone. I took a seat on the couch's armrest, listening to them talk about an inside joke I wasn't part of. They didn't exclude me openly. They simply continued conversations that had been happening long before I arrived. When I tried contributing, Mara responded with a compliment about my job that sounded supportive, but held an undercurrent of something else, something evaluative, like she was checking off a box on a mental list. Tyler cracked a joke that felt like it was meant to smooth things over, but his eyes drifted sideways toward Mara, as if asking her approval. Leah watched quietly, smiling in a soft way that felt more like empathy than camaraderie. I remembered thinking their dynamic reminded me of a puzzle with one piece replaced by another that didn't quite fit, even if the colors seemed similar. But I didn't allow that thought to settle. I told myself it was normal to feel like an outsider at first. I told myself I had to give them time. There was a moment, though, when Ethan pulled me aside into the kitchen to help him open a bottle of wine. He stood too close, too rigid, and his voice carried a slight tremor when he asked if I was okay. I said yes because nothing had happened yet, not really, but the way he exhaled relieved made my stomach twist. It was the second moment that didn't align. When we returned to the living room, Mara was scrolling through her phone again, and Tyler was telling a story about a coworker who had no idea she was being tolerated. They laughed lightly, but as I sat down, the laughter dimmed and reshaped itself slightly softer, slightly more courteous. I tried to shake the feeling that the story hadn't been as random as it sounded. Leah asked me a gentle question about a recent project I'd worked on. I told her about the interface redesign I'd led for a local nonprofit. Before I even finished, Mara said, "That's cute," in a tone I couldn't categorize, warm enough to sound friendly, cold enough to feel diminishing. Ethan didn't say anything. He smiled at me, but it carried a thinness, as though he wanted me to let it go. Looking back, I realized that was the moment a small part of me tightened, expecting something I couldn't name yet. The cold doorknob, the warped reflection, the shift in tone when I walked in, those were early signs. But hindsight always outlines patterns that the present hides. That night closed with nothing dramatic. Just a series of glances that floated between people like silent messages, a few too long pauses, a few too short laughs. But the undercurrent was there, a faint outline of something forming beneath the surface. When Ethan walked me to my car, he held my hand tightly the way people do when they want to reassure you of something before you realize you need reassurance. I remember wondering why. I didn't have an answer yet. I would soon. The week after that gathering, things felt normal on the surface, at least enough that I convinced myself the tension I'd sensed was just the awkwardness of mismatched personalities. But quiet doesn't always mean calm. Sometimes it's just the air settling before something shifts again. When Ethan suggested we meet his friends for a casual dinner at a small gastropub near downtown, I said yes without hesitation. I wanted to believe the earlier uneasiness had been imaginary. I wanted the version of events where nothing was wrong to be true. The evening began without trouble. The restaurant was dim lit mostly by amber sconces that gave the wooden tables a warm glow. We arrived before the others, and while we waited, Ethan seemed unusually focused on small talk, asking about my day, brushing dust from my shoulder that wasn't there, adjusting the salt shaker twice as if the symmetry mattered. I tried to hold the moment lightly, reminding myself to give him space. But the way his smile flickered around the edges told me he was preparing for something. When the others arrived, it wasn't dramatic. It was the sort of entrance people make when they've already been together before meeting you. Tyler walked in first, laughing at something Mara said behind him. Mara followed with that crisp confidence she always wore like a well-fitted jacket. Leah came last, her soft posture as apologetic as always, as though she felt the need to excuse herself for entering any room. We settled in around a table that felt too small for the number of elbows and drinks it now held. The waitress took our orders and conversation began in those light, fluttery tones groups adopt when they're trying to appear effortlessly cohesive. I watched the shadows of everyone's hands dance across the polished table, the amber light catching in glasses in a way that made the surface look liquid. At some point in the dinner, after Ethan had told a mild story about a bug in one of his projects, and Tyler had offered a playful jab in return, a server approached with a tray of drinks. Tyler reached for the bill before anyone else could, waving away Ethan's attempt to help. He pulled the small paper slip from the leather folder and unfolded it with a flourish, cracking a grin like he enjoyed being the magnanimous one. He set the receipt slip, our required object, right in the center of the table when he was done with it. It lay there like something harmless, just another artifact of an ordinary night. But the top corner curled up, exposing part of the timestamp printed in neat black ink. 09:43 p.m. I glanced at it without meaning to, the way you accidentally read something in front of you. And the moment I saw it, something tightened inside my chest. Ethan had told me the night before that he and Tyler had grabbed takeout from a place across town at exactly that time. I remembered because I'd asked when he got home, and he'd said around 9:40, giving a precise time that now didn't match the location we were sitting in. I didn't react, not outwardly. But I felt the tiny snap of a thread, a subtle loosening of trust that I didn't fully understand yet. I tucked the detail away quietly, folding it into the part of my mind that held unresolved questions. Conversation continued, but the cadence had changed for me. I found myself paying closer attention to the way people spoke, the way Mara tilted her head when someone else spoke, the way Tyler's voice lifted at the end of certain comments, as if searching the air for approval. None of it was accusatory, just curious. But I'd learned that curiosity can uncover what politeness hides. Mara asked about a presentation I'd led at work earlier that week. Her tone was bright, maybe even interested, but her eyes had that evaluative sharpness again. When I finished explaining, she nodded with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nice," she said lightly, as though grading an assignment. The word hung in the air long enough to reshape itself into something less kind. Tyler chimed in with a joke about how he'd be lost in my line of work. It was meant to soften the tension, but the laugh that followed felt like a placeholder for something unsaid. Leah's sympathetic look flickered across the table brief enough that no one else noticed. I shouldn't have fixated on the receipt. It was such a small detail in the sweep of the evening. But once I'd seen that timestamp, LK21:09:43 p.m., my mind began mapping it against the memory of Ethan's voice, the way he'd said the number so specifically, the way he'd shrugged when I asked why it took so long for them to get home. I remembered the faint crease between his eyebrows when he'd explained as if even then he'd been rehearsing something. No one else noticed me looking at the receipt, no one but Tyler. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision, his hand sliding casually across the table, his fingers brushing over the edge of the slip as if repositioning it. But he slid it just far enough to obscure the timestamp from me. Not dramatically, just enough. A gentle correction. A quiet concealment. And Ethan glanced at him. It was quick, a subtle exchange of eyes, the kind men share when they're trying to align their stories without speaking. A flicker of tension, a spark of shared awareness. Then both looked away at the same time, pretending it hadn't happened. That was when I knew the mismatch wasn't accidental. Conversation resumed, but everything now felt slightly offbeat. The table talk drifted into weekend plans I hadn't been included in. Mara described brunch reservations with a breezy excitement that didn't include me, though. Ethan had told me earlier they'd invited us both. When I glanced at him, he didn't meet my eyes. I felt myself recede slightly from the center of the moment, becoming an observer instead of a participant. The flicker of the restaurant's candlelight on the table made everyone's faces shift, subtly revealing tiny fractures in otherwise smooth expressions. Mara's polite smile, Tyler's forced laughter, Ethan's rigid posture, they all lined up like signs I hadn't been willing to interpret until now. Leah spoke to me softly, asking about my plans for the upcoming holiday. She seemed unaware of the tension building between the rest of us, or maybe she noticed and chose not to participate in it. Either way, her voice was the only one that didn't feel coded in some unspoken meaning. The dinner ended without confrontation, but the air carried a charge that clung to me long after we left. Ethan walked beside me toward the parking lot, saying something about dessert options, but I barely heard him. My attention kept circling back to the receipt slip, to the quick glance between him and Tyler, to the way the timestamp contradicted the earlier story. When we reached his car, I stopped, my fingers resting lightly on the roof. "Did you really go to the takeout place last night?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough for my stomach to drop. Then he said yes too quickly, like he had to pull the word from somewhere unprepared. I nodded, pretending to accept it. I wasn't ready for the truth yet, but I was ready to start listening. The night ended with no raised voices, no accusations, just the quiet realization that something didn't match, something small, something easy to overlook, but fractures always start small. And that receipt, LK21:09:43 p.m., was the first one I could see. The birthday gathering was louder than any of us expected, the kind of celebration where the music sits just below conversation level and the lighting is dim enough to hide anything except intention. The bar had an industrial feel, metal beams, low-hanging bulbs, shadows, stretching like long fingers across the hardwood floor. When Ethan and I stepped inside, warmth rushed over us in a wave of perfume, spilled citrus, and too many overlapping voices. His friends were already there, gathered around a tall table near the back. I could see them before they saw me. Mara leaning in with theatrical laughter, Tyler throwing his head back as if the world revolved around his amusement, and Leah sitting still watching rather than participating. The moment they noticed us, the tone shifted. It wasn't obvious. It never is at first. Mara straightened, smoothing her hair. Tyler lowered his arm mid-gesture. Leah offered a quick smile that felt like an apology she couldn't name. Ethan squeezed my hand lightly before letting go, leaving my fingers cold. I followed him to the table, feeling the hum of the room settle into a rhythm that wasn't friendly so much as performative. The glass ashtray, tonight's required object, sat in the center of the table, catching the dim orange light in angled fragments. It reflected everything around it in broken pieces. I took the seat closest to it without meaning to, as if the object had pulled me toward the place where the scene would turn. Small talk started, the kind that felt borrowed from a script they'd practiced. Tyler asked about my week without listening to the answer. Mara complimented my sweater, then added softly, I could never pull off something so simple in a tone that suggested the word simple wasn't referring to fabric. I kept my expression calm, my voice even. I had learned how to survive moments like this by taking up as little emotional space as possible. Then came the shift. It happened almost gracefully. Mara lifted her phone as if checking a message, tilted her head and said, "Oh, actually, Avery, you should see this. It's hilarious." Her smile was bright enough to be blinding, but her eyes held that sharp glint I'd begun to dread. She turned the screen toward me. A chat thread between Mara and Tyler, and Ethan. I read the words quickly, instinctively. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. She's sweet, but sort of replaceable, right? Yeah, she's fine. He'll figure it out. Starter fiancé energy LOL. I didn't need to know which of them typed which line. The tone was the same across all of them, dismissive light, as if discussing a product they'd tested and decided wasn't durable enough. Mara's laugh cut through the air. It's just jokes. You know how we are. I didn't laugh. The ashtray caught a razor-edged sliver of light, sending it across the table and briefly illuminating Tyler's shifting expression. Leah's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth as if to intervene, but no words came out. Ethan leaned forward abruptly. "Mara, come on," he said, but his voice lacked any real push. He looked at me, then quick and pleading, as though he wanted me to absorb the blow quietly, the way a good fit would. People around us began to notice the tension. A couple at a nearby table paused their conversation. Someone at the bar turned slightly, exactly as required. The world grew still enough that the tiny hum of the overhead lights felt amplified. Tyler attempted damage control. "It was just teasing," he said too loudly, raising his hands as if laughter might rescue the moment. "We didn't mean anything by it." But meaning wasn't the issue. Intent wasn't the issue. The evidence existed. Words typed without hesitation reveal truth more honestly than spoken ones. I looked at Ethan again. His face held panic, embarrassment, and something else, fear of confrontation, not fear of hurting me. He whispered, "Avery," in a voice that required forgiveness before accountability. Leah finally spoke. "That wasn't a joke," she said quietly, but firmly enough that Mara's smile cracked for the first time. The ashtray glinted again, as if reflecting a fracture in the social fabric. I didn't speak, not yet. The silence I gave them was sharper than any response would have been. It drew lines through the moment, forcing everyone to sit with what they'd shown me. The part ended the way all fractures begin, with light breaking across a surface that had seemed whole moments before. The ride home after the birthday gathering felt like being carried through a tunnel with no windows, just dim, passing lights smearing across the windshield, while neither of us spoke. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel, gripping it so tightly the tendons in his wrists lifted like pale cords beneath his skin. I sat angled toward the window, watching reflections of street lamps ripple over the glass and distort my face into shifting, incomplete shapes. That felt appropriate. I didn't know what shape I was supposed to hold anymore. Not with him, not with them, not with the version of myself I had tried to offer to people who apparently found me disposable. He cleared his throat as we turned onto his street, and I felt the apology forming heavy and clumsy, tangled in the air between us. "Avery," he started, but the syllables collapsed into silence when he couldn't decide where to go next. I didn't answer. The quiet between us wasn't avoidance, it was the only thing preventing the moment from cracking open into something we couldn't undo. The street lamps passed in rhythmic bursts, each light casting a quick metallic glow across Ethan's profile before dropping it back into shadow. I watched the shift, the flicker of regret, the tension along his jawline, the way he swallowed hard like he needed courage he still hadn't found. He parked outside his apartment building and finally whispered, "I didn't know they were going to show you that." As if that was the sin, not the words, not the fact he'd already seen them before I did. Just the exposure. I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, the metal clicking like a small verdict. "That's not the part that matters," I said quietly, then stepped out of the car before he could respond. Inside the hallway, the air held that faint chemical smell I always associated with late-night cleaning, the kind that makes everything feel sterile and slightly unreal. Ethan walked a few paces behind me, his footsteps slow, careful, betraying his uncertainty. When he reached the apartment door, he hesitated before unlocking it, turning the silver key, the required object for this part, in a motion too hesitant to be automatic. The key clicked, but he didn't push the door open immediately. He stood there with his hand on the knob, as if waiting for permission to step into his own space. I was the one who pushed the door. The apartment greeted us with dim, uneven lighting, the kind that throws long shadows across the floor and turns familiar objects into silhouettes. Ethan flicked on a lamp, but the bulb gave off only a dull glow, leaving the corners submerged in quiet darkness. I walked inside without removing my coat, letting the fabric anchor me in something stable, while the room seemed to shift around us. Ethan hovered near the kitchen island, touching random objects, a coaster, a pen, a stray coin, like he needed something to hold but couldn't decide what. I watched him silently, my heartbeat steady, my anger surprisingly cool. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I wasn't reacting the way he expected me to. And that unsettled him more than if I had yelled. "Listen," he began, rubbing his temple. "They get carried away sometimes. You know how they are. They joke. It's stupid, but they didn't mean—" "They meant it," I said. I didn't raise my voice. The words landed without heat, which made them heavier. "And you knew." His throat tightened visibly. "I didn't say it. You saw that. I never— You didn't stop it." He clenched his jaw, exhaled, and paced toward the counter as though movement could save him from standing still with the truth. "It wasn't worth the fight," he muttered. "Mara gets defensive. Tyler jokes more when he's nervous. It would have become a thing. I just didn't want it to blow up." I stared at him. It already did. That silenced him. He ran a hand through his hair, gripping the strands like he needed the sensation to stay grounded. "Avery, please. I know it looked bad. It was bad." He winced, not at my tone, but at the simplicity of the statement. Truth doesn't need embellishment. It bruises on contact. While he stood there searching for a version of the moment, he could explain away my gaze drifted across the counter, sliding over the clutter of mail and stray receipts scattered there. That was when I saw it, a single sheet poking out from beneath a stack of envelopes, the corner bent like it had been handled too quickly. I stepped closer. Ethan didn't notice. I pulled the paper free, a printed schedule shift record labeled WK Shift 12, a timestamp at the top, a list of shift assignments. And right beside the date Ethan claimed he'd been working late, his name was absent. His shift had ended hours earlier than he told me. It aligned too neatly with the receipt from the other night. The mismatch wasn't random. It was layered. I felt the clarity settle over me like a quiet cold. I didn't show the paper to him, not yet. Instead, I folded it in half with slow precision and set it on the table. The motion caught his attention. "What's that?" he asked, eyes narrowing as he tried to see the text on the page. "A timeline," I said softly. He opened his mouth to ask more, but I walked away from the counter and into the living room, forcing him to follow. The apartment felt different now, like the walls themselves were listening, storing the conversation in their corners. The silver key on the hallway table glinted faintly, a symbol of the access he had always taken for granted, and the trust he assumed I'd keep offering. He approached confusion, tightening his features. "Avery, can we please talk about this like adults?" The phrasing made something inside me harden. I replied. You're the one avoiding the part that matters. What part is that you lied?" His face drained. "No, it wasn't Avery, come on. I didn't speak. Silence can be crueler than accusation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice the way people do when they're afraid of the answer they're about to hear. "Do you think I'm choosing them over you?" I looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, but with clarity. "I think you already did." He flinched. Actually flinched. For several seconds the apartment was nothing but quiet breath and the low hum of the old refrigerator. Then Ethan whispered, "I'm trying." "So am I." He didn't have a response to that. He walked back toward the kitchen, shoulders sagging under the weight of something he didn't want to confront. He stared at the folded shift record as if hoping it would rewrite itself when he looked away. It didn't. The night stretched on without another argument. Just two people sitting in the same room, separated by the space created by small lies and smaller silences. The silver key remained on the table between us, catching the dim light the way a boundary catches intention, quietly, unmistakably. By the time midnight approached, I realized something simple and sharp, something I hadn't wanted to see until the evidence forced it. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught in the middle. He was comfortable. Comfortable with me being the one expected to bend. Comfortable with his friends deciding my value. Comfortable with silence where there should have been defense. And comfort can be more dangerous than cruelty. When I finally stood to leave, Ethan didn't stop me. He didn't ask what I'd discovered. He didn't ask how I felt. He just whispered, "We'll fix it," with a hope so thin it felt like smoke. But hope without accountability dissolves. I walked to the door, touched the silver key lightly with my fingertips, and stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the version of us he was trying to hold together with empty reassurances. Something had broken. Not loudly, not abruptly, but undeniably. The cafe was nearly empty when I slipped into a corner booth, the kind made of worn red vinyl that creaked quietly under your weight, as if it had memorized every tired body that ever sat in it. The overhead lights were weak and slightly tinted, the kind that turn everything the color of old photographs. Outside, rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers tracing rhythms I couldn't decode. It wasn't late, but it felt like the world had already gone to sleep without telling me. That suited me. I needed a place where silence didn't feel like judgment, where I could sort the pieces of the last few days without anyone watching for my reactions. The table surface in front of me was scratched and scarred from years of restless hands and drifting conversations. But my eyes went immediately to the small cigarette burn near the edge, the required object, an almost perfect ring of blackened indentation, like a tiny eclipse suspended in wood. Its shape felt deliberate, precise, the kind of damage that happens when heat rests somewhere longer than it should. I ran my fingertip near it close enough to feel the roughness, but not close enough to touch the mark itself. Something about it made the air feel heavier, a subtle reminder that damage can be quiet, patient, and still permanent. I opened my phone with a slow breath, not sure what I expected to find, but knowing I had to follow the thread. I scrolled past texts, past work emails, past old reminders I'd been ignoring until something familiar caught my eye. A file name I didn't remember saving, AC04. The tiny audio icon sat there like a forgotten secret waiting in plain sight. It wasn't new. Its timestamp placed it around the night weeks earlier when I'd felt an unnamed pressure in the room but hadn't been able to articulate why. I tapped it, but before the audio played, something inside me shifted, a kind of premonition that the truth was about to rearrange itself. Before pressing play, the motif echo reached the surface of my thoughts, forming itself into words I didn't consciously craft. Glass reflection trembles when truth presses through static and unsettles the waiting silence. The line slipped into the moment, as if it belonged there. No flourish, no explanation, just truth meeting itself. When I finally tapped the screen, the recording clicked alive with a burst of low static. Then, through the grainy distortion, two voices emerged. Mara's sharp tone softened only by distance. Tyler's laugh, that familiar upward lilt that always seemed to be searching for approval. Their words weren't clear at first, muffled by movement, thickened by background noise, but as the audio settled, the meaning dissolved through the static like ink in water. I mean, come on, she's placeholder material. He won't stick with her. Everyone knows he always trades up. Starter fiancé. And a final low laugh, dismissive, easy cruel. The cigarette burn's dark ring seemed to deepen the shadows around it, sharpening. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even surprised. It was confirmation, not revelation. But hearing it with my own ears, hearing the tone, the ease, the casual cruelty hit me differently than seeing it in text. Voices reveal intent in ways words can't hide. I let the audio play again and again. Each time the static grew sharper, the cruelty clearer, the timeline more undeniable. The motif echo reverberated through the moment, binding itself to the audio, turning the reflection into something still trembling beneath the surface. I remembered the way Mara had shown me the screenshot at the party, her smile too polished, her posture too confident. I remembered Tyler's nervous laughter, the way his eyes had darted toward Ethan whenever something too honest slipped out. I remembered Ethan's hesitation, his silence, his explanation about not wanting to escalate things. The audio made all those moments fall into place like pieces of a pattern that had always been there, just unstitched. Some truths don't announce themselves loudly. They hum in the background until you finally recognize the frequency. The cafe's entrance bell jingled faintly as a couple walked in, shaking rain from their coats. Their presence shifted the air slightly, but I stayed in the booth, absorbed in my own small storm. The cigarette burn near my hand remained a perfect circle of held heat, a reminder that some harm lingers long after the flame is gone. I replayed the recording one last time, this time closing my eyes to hear it fully. I listened to the cadence of their voices, the confidence with which they judged me, the way they wrapped their opinions in tones meant to sound harmless. But the part that struck me hardest wasn't Mara. It wasn't Tyler. It was the moment I recognized Ethan's laugh, layered faintly in the background, not loud, not central, but present. Complicit by proximity. Participating by inaction. He hadn't defended me then either. He hadn't said my name with any kind of intention. He had laughed. A quiet, almost polite laugh that told me everything. When the recording ended, I let the silence take over. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, dense, and full of the weight of everything I now understood. The cigarette burn on the table felt like an echo of something burning inside me. Slow, quiet, deliberate. I placed my phone face down on the table, the screen going dark. My reflection in the window beside me appeared in fragments broken by raindrops sliding down the glass, shifting me into incomplete shapes once more. Maybe reflections weren't meant to hold whole truths. Maybe they were meant to show the parts people tried to ignore. I sat there for a long time, breathing through the moment, until my pulse steadied. Not from acceptance, but preparation. Because the evidence chain was no longer abstract. It was real, documented, irrefutable. Receipt, screenshot, shift record, audio clip. Pieces forming a timeline I could no longer dismiss. Outside headlights swept across the wet pavement, briefly illuminating my reflection in the window. And for the first time, I didn't look away. I gathered my things, slipped my phone into my coat, and stood from the booth. The cigarette burn remained behind a silent witness, embedded into the wood, carrying the echo of what I'd uncovered. When I stepped out into the rain, the cold hit my face, sharply clearing whatever fog had lingered in my mind. Water streaked down the windows, blurring the light in trembling lines that matched the pulse of the truth I now held. The night felt different, not heavier, not lighter, just clear. And clarity can be the beginning of everything, or the end. Leah chose a hospital corridor for our conversation, and somehow it felt right. Sterile floors, muted footsteps, machines humming softly behind closed doors, an environment where truth didn't have anywhere to hide. It was late enough that the hall was nearly empty, except for a nurse pushing a cart and a doctor reading something on a clipboard near the far wall. The overhead dim lamp, the required object, flickered once as I stepped inside, then steadied into a long, cold glow that stretched our shadows thin across the tile. She waved me over with a small motion, her expression tight in a way I hadn't seen before. Leah was many things, gentle observant, conflict avoidant, but she wasn't dramatic. If she'd asked to meet me here surrounded by antiseptic air and echoing silence, it meant something was pressing against her conscience hard enough to break through. "Avery," she said softly, folding her hands together like she needed to anchor them. "Thank you for coming. I figured it wasn't a casual chat," I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Her eyes flicked toward the dim lamp above us. Its glow created an uneven halo on the wall, the cut-light line sliding diagonally across her cheek as though highlighting the weight of what she hadn't said yet. She drew a breath. "I'm not good at involving myself in other people's business. But after what happened the other night," she hesitated. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The lamplight buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the hall, a heart monitor beeped at a steady rhythm grounding the moment. She looked straight at me. "I heard something at the party. Something they didn't know I heard." My stomach tightened. Not from fear those days were over, but from the sense that another piece of the puzzle was about to click into place whether I wanted it to or not. Leah swallowed, then spoke with deliberate care. "Mara and Tyler were talking behind the bar before you arrived. I was close enough that they didn't realize I could hear them. Mara said—" She paused, gathering herself. "She's temporary. He always trades up." There it was. A witness statement, not dramatic, not long, but sharp enough to draw blood. It didn't surprise me. The audio clip had already carved out the truth. But hearing it from someone who wasn't performing cruelty made it land differently. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't interpretation. It was confirmation. I let the words settle. The dim lamp's shadow curved across Leah's face, half in light, half in darkness, fitting for someone caught between loyalty to the group and discomfort with their behavior. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. I didn't know if it was my place." But after the screenshot, and then seeing how they reacted when you didn't fall apart, I tilted my head slightly. They wanted me to fall apart. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. I think they wanted to be proven right. I absorbed it without blinking. It aligned perfectly with the timestamp mismatch the screenshot revealed Ethan's shifting silence, the audio clip. Every piece supported the same conclusion. The friend group's hierarchy demanded someone lower, and they'd appointed me by convenience. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked quietly. "Because I saw your face when Mara showed you that screenshot," she said. "And because afterward, when Ethan looked more embarrassed about the moment than about the words I realized." She hesitated. "You didn't have anyone at that table." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard. I had expected facts, not empathy. The dim lamp hummed above us, throwing another cut of light across the wall. In this space where people fought for their lives or their clarity, small emotional truths felt amplified. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked. "I'm not telling you to do anything," Leah said. "But you deserve to know what they really think. Unfiltered." She looked down briefly, then met my gaze with a steadiness that surprised me. And I don't think Ethan realizes how much he lets them define things for him. There it was, the subtle shift. A truth not about the group, but about him. She wasn't accusing him outright, but she didn't need to. The implication hung there like a suspended cord. I leaned back slightly, feeling the cool wall behind me. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She nodded once, her shoulders relaxing as if releasing something she'd been carrying for days. A nurse passed between us, pushing a tray. The wheels squeaked softly, and the movement caused the dim lamp's shadow to shift again, cutting a clean line across my shoes. A visual echo of the moment splitting into two before Leah's words, after Leah's words. We stood like that for a while, two women in the middle of a sterile hallway, sharing a truth that didn't belong to either of us, but implicated all of us. When Leah finally spoke again, her voice held a quiet steel I hadn't heard from her before. Whatever you decide to do, you won't be wrong. A simple statement, deceptively gentle. But it carried weight. Permission, validation. The suggestion that my internal compass wasn't flawed, just tested. I nodded. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. You will, she said. When it's time. The dim lamp flickered once more, illuminating her face fully before sinking back into its soft glow. Then Leah stepped away, offering a final small smile, one that held no hidden meaning, no judgment, no hierarchy, just sincerity. When I walked toward the exit, the hallway lights stretched my shadow along the floor, elongated but unbroken. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of distant traffic. The night air hit me with a crisp clarity that matched the new shape of what I understood. Receipt, screenshot, shift record, audio clip, now a witness statement. The pattern wasn't forming, it was complete. But this wasn't the moment to confront Ethan or his friends. Not yet. Patterns don't just reveal, they strategize. They tell you where to place the next step. I stepped out into the cold evening, breathing in a steadiness that felt like the beginning of something deliberate, something sharpened. Leah's words echoed as the door closed behind me. I didn't have anyone at that table, but I had the truth, and soon everyone else would too. The community center was buzzing with movement. When I arrived, volunteers arranging folding tables, kids weaving between clusters of adults, fluorescent lights casting their usual harsh glow across the linoleum. It should have felt warm, communal. Instead, it felt like walking into a stage set mid-scene, everyone already in character, everyone aware of their marks except me. I spotted Ethan and his friends near the front entrance. Mara was directing someone with performative confidence. Tyler was juggling boxes with exaggerated showmanship, and Leah, quiet as always, was sorting paperwork by the registration booth. None of them had seen me yet. That was good. This part required observation before confrontation. The signature object for this part, the mirror shard, appeared almost immediately. It was part of an art installation along the front hallway, a broken mosaic meant to represent fractured community unified vision. A poetic attempt at symbolism. One shard in particular caught my eye, a slanted piece half the size of my palm, set at an angle that reflected a thin cutting streak of overhead light. The cut light line ran across the floor like a sharp path leading exactly where I didn't want to go, but needed to. I paused long enough to let the reflection slide over the toe of my shoe, then continued forward. Leah noticed me first. Her expression shifted in that soft, apologetic way she had, as if she already knew something was about to give. She lifted a hand in a hesitant wave. I returned it with a small nod, then glanced toward the others. They hadn't seen us yet. Or maybe they had, and were pretending not to. Tyler's laughter broke through the hallway, too loud, too bright, ringing false in a space meant for quiet organization. Mara stood with her arms crossed, giving directions with clipped authority that suggested she loved being in charge of anything others depended on. Ethan hovered near the corner, half listening, half detached, staring at something on his phone with the deeply focused look he wore when avoiding reality. I took out my phone and opened the message Leah had sent earlier. CCTV still angle 2B. Time-stamped the same night Mara and Tyler claimed they were with Ethan. But the image showed them outside a bar 3 miles away, Mara holding a drink, Tyler lighting a cigarette. Ethan nowhere in sight. Their alibi wasn't just shaky, it was impossible. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked toward them. The air tightened with every step. Mara was the first to notice, her face lit up with a brightness too immediate to be real. "Avery, you made it," she said, the cheer in her voice wrapped in thin plastic. Tyler echoed her enthusiasm. "Hey, look who's here. Ethan said you were busy." Ethan's stiffened eyes snapping up from his phone. His surprise wasn't guilty yet, but it wasn't comfortable either. "You didn't text me you were coming," he said carefully. I didn't know I needed permission, I replied calmly. The tension landed with a soft thud between us. Tyler laughed, but the sound wavered. Whoa, hey, no need for that tone. We're all good here. But the way his foot shifted backward, the way Mara's smile faltered at the edges, they knew something was off. I turned to Mara. Quick question, I said lightly. That night last week, are you still sure you and Tyler were at Ethan's around 9? Her eyebrows shot up. Of course, why wouldn't we be? Tyler nodded too quickly. Yeah, we all hung out together. Right, Ethan. Ethan opened his mouth, but I cut him off by taking out my phone and holding up the CCTV still. Because this says otherwise. The reaction was immediate. Mara's pupils tightened. Tyler's jaw dropped a fraction. Ethan's face drained. Leah froze, then looked away, not in shock, but in confirmation. Mara's voice sharpened. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I asked. The timestamp doesn't lie. It's from another night, Tyler said, swallowing hard. Probably. Angle 2B, I said. The bar camera. Same night, same time. Mara inhaled sharply, her composure fraying around the edges. Okay, hold on. Maybe we stepped out for a minute. You said you never left, I reminded her. Your words, repeated twice. Ethan's silence pressed against the moment like a weight. He looked at his friends, then at me, then back at them, piecing together the implications far too slowly. I watched their hierarchy tilt, not collapse yet, just tilt, enough to expose the imbalance beneath. You're twisting this, Mara said, voice cracking just slightly. You're making something out of nothing. It wasn't nothing, Leah murmured, barely audible. I turned toward her, offering a quiet acknowledgement. She didn't step forward, but she didn't retreat either. That was enough. The mirror shard's reflection stretched across the floor as someone opened the front door, the light slicing between us like a blade. It felt like the moment dividing two versions of reality, theirs, where lies were casual and cruelty was social currency, and mine, where truth was assembling itself into something undeniable. Tyler tried again to salvage the scene. Look, Avery, let's not make this dramatic. Who said anything about drama? I said, stepping closer. I'm just correcting the timeline. The words hit harder than any accusation, because they were factual, simple, unshakable. Ethan spoke for the first time, voice quiet and unsure. Avery, can we talk somewhere else? No, I said, not yet. Mara's eyes flashed with something sharp, panic, resentment, fear, all tangled together. You're being unfair, she insisted. And you're being dishonest, I replied. The hallway fell silent, except for the distant echo of children laughing in another room. It felt wrong, almost surreal, that this confrontation was unfolding against a backdrop of community service and painted murals. But maybe that contrast was fitting. Some truths need the harsh glare of fluorescent lights to be fully seen. A volunteer passed by, sensing tension slowing briefly before continuing down the hall. A witness without understanding, perfect for a near-reversal scene. I held Mara's gaze until she looked away, a small victory, but a telling one. The CCTV still remained on my phone screen, glowing coldly between us, the timeline rupture that couldn't be smoothed over. This isn't over, Mara whispered. No, I said, turning slightly toward Ethan. It's not. I walked away before any of them could respond. The mirror shard caught the light again, flashing one last time behind me, like a signal that the fractures were no longer subtle, they were structural. The apartment felt different when I walked in, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that settles after someone's shouted truth in the next room, and no one's willing to open the door to check what happened. I didn't turn on the light right away. I let the dim glow from the hallway spill into the space, shaping the furniture into faint outlines. The air had a slight chill, as though the room itself had been holding its breath in my absence. I slipped out of my coat and placed it neatly over the back of a chair. Everything felt too deliberate, too staged. Maybe because I needed it to be. Maybe because clarity sharpens your motions the way pressure sharpens glass edges. I walked toward the small table near the kitchen, the one where Ethan tended to leave his clutter mail receipts, half-finished thoughts disguised as sticky notes. Tonight, it felt like an altar of contradictions waiting to be sorted. The torn envelope, the required object for this part, peeked out from beneath a stack of unpaid bills. Its corner was ripped jaggedly, as though someone had torn it open in a hurry, not caring about neatness or what was left behind. I remembered Ethan's distracted hand ripping it open days earlier, a gesture I hadn't questioned then. But now, in the growing silence of the apartment, the torn edge seemed like a clue hiding in plain sight. I pulled the envelope free, letting the rest of the papers slide aside. Inside was a bank slip. Not just any slip. Account Ref 17Z. A withdrawal for an amount that didn't raise eyebrows on its own, but the timestamp did. It was stamped at a time Ethan had insisted he was home, claiming exhaustion after a long day. Another misplaced detail. Another fracture in the narrative he had tried to keep stitched together with vagueness and half-truths. I placed the torn envelope and its bank slip on the table, aligning them next to the folded shift record from earlier. Next came the screenshot printout I'd saved in my bag, then the receipt from Tyler's pub night, then the audio clip queued up on my phone screen. I arranged them not out of spite, but out of necessity, a visual constellation of reality. Patterns only become undeniable when you lay them flat and stop giving them excuses to hide. I sat down slowly, pressing my palms to the cool wooden surface. The truth wasn't emotional anymore. It was architectural, a structure I could map, measure, and hold. I didn't feel fear or heartbreak. I felt something colder, something steadier, the kind of clarity that arrives only after the fog burns away and leaves you standing in full daylight, whether you wanted the sun or not. Ethan's key turned in the lock moments later. He stepped inside quietly, as if noise might break something fragile. When he saw me sitting at the table, posture straight, eyes alert, he froze mid-step. "Avery," he said carefully, "you're home early." I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured toward the chair across from me. He sat, slowly, cautiously, like he already suspected the shape of what I'd uncovered. His gaze drifted to the object spread across the table. "What? What is all this?" "The timeline," I replied. He swallowed hard. "Avery, Before you explain," I interrupted. "Just look." I slid the bank slip toward him first. His eyes flickered his facade, cracking the moment he recognized the timestamp. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Then the shift record, then the receipt, then the screenshot, then the audio clip still paused at the exact second his faint laugh entered the background. Each piece landed like a quiet piece of truth laid bare. No theatrics, no accusations, just evidence lining itself up without apology. He reached for the bank slip, then stopped, fingers tightening around the air instead of the paper. "Avery, this isn't what you think." I raised an eyebrow. "Then tell me what I think." His lips parted, but nothing came out. I waited, not impatiently, not angrily, just with calm expectation. Silence stretched. He breathed in sharply. "I didn't lie," he tried. "Your shift record says you did. I didn't mean to. The receipt says otherwise. It was complicated. The CCTV timestamp isn't." "Avery, listen, I have been." I tapped the phone. "To all of you." His shoulders slumped, the defeat in his posture rising quicker than any defense. He looked older in that moment, worn down by the truth he'd been pushing aside in hopes it would dissolve on its own. But truth doesn't dissolve. It settles. It accumulates. It chooses its moment. He rubbed his hands over his face, dragging them down slowly. "I didn't want things to get messy," he whispered. "They already are," I replied. He lowered his hands, eyes searching mine with a desperate softness. "I wasn't choosing them over you. Then why did all your choices look like it?" He didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because he did. His silence became a confession. The apartment felt heavier, the air thick with the realization that he hadn't been caught off guard. He'd been caught in a pattern, one he had allowed, one he had participated in, even if only through quiet compliance. I leaned back slightly. This isn't about one mistake. It's about consistency. His eyes glistened not with tears, but with a dawning comprehension that his passivity had consequences, real ones. "You know," I said softly, "I don't need perfect honesty. I just need intention. I need to matter more than convenience." He broke then, not dramatically, but visibly. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracked open. "I'm so sorry." I nodded once slowly, not in forgiveness, in acknowledgement, because the real confrontation wasn't tonight. It was coming, and it wouldn't be private. I gathered the pieces of evidence, sliding them neatly into a folder. Ethan watched the motion with dread he didn't try to hide. Is this it?" he asked, voice barely audible. "No," I said, standing. "This is the preparation." His eyes widened, the meaning hitting him. Avery, wait. But I'd already moved toward the door. Some truths need witnesses, and tomorrow he would have plenty. The restaurant Ethan chose for the clearing, the Air Dinner, was one of those places that tried a little too hard to look effortless. Matte black walls, soft amber lighting, sleek tables that reflected only the sharpest edges of anything placed on them. It was curated serenity, a stage set for calm conversation, which made it the perfect place for the truth to detonate. You learn eventually that people who avoid conflict will choose the most aesthetically peaceful places to hide it. I arrived a few minutes early, not to prepare myself, but to take in the room, to map the lighting, the angles, the exits. The space hummed a muted jazz track identical to the one they'd played for years. A waiter guided me to the long table near the back where groups usually sat. As I placed my phone on the table, my reflection stared back at me, clean, centered, unbroken. For now. The signature object for this part, the audio recorder, was sitting on a shelf behind me as part of the restaurant's decor, an antique reel-to-reel player mounted in a glass case, its red indicator light glowing faintly even though it wasn't in use. A symbolic witness, a reminder, a perfect echo for what I was about to expose. Ethan entered first. He wore a nervous smile, stretched too thin at the edges like it had been ironed into place. "Hey," he said softly. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, but I turned my head slightly, letting it land near my temple instead, just enough to register distance. His eyes faltered, then recovered, but not convincingly. Mara and Tyler came next, walking as a pair, always a pair, laughing a little too loudly, as if the performance of joy could preemptively rewrite whatever was coming. Leah followed at a slower pace, her eyes already scanning the tension like she was taking vital signs from the atmosphere. Everyone sat. Menus opened. Small talk began, careful and shapeless. But no one ordered. They were waiting for me to break the silence. The irony was almost laughable. Ethan cleared his throat. "I just want us to reset tonight," he said. "Start clean. No tension, no hard feelings. Just us." Mara nodded with earnestness, sharpened by self-interest. "Yeah, a reset sounds perfect," Tyler added. "We all said dumb stuff. Water under the bridge, right?" Leah didn't speak. Her hands twisted together under the table. I looked at each of them slowly, letting the quiet stretch until Mara's smile twitched. The restaurant's lighting cast a thin golden band across the table, illuminating the polished surface like a spotlight waiting for someone to step into it. "Before we reset," I said gently, "we need accuracy." Mara blinked. "Accuracy?" Tyler laughed weakly. "Yeah, what does that mean?" I reached for my phone. Calm, slow, deliberate. My thumb hovered over the file name, VM1114, the final truth drop. Ethan recognized the motion immediately. His hand clenched around the edge of the table as if bracing for impact. Mara's eyes narrowed. Tyler's posture stiffened. Leah inhaled quietly. "It means I said that before we pretend nothing happened, we should all remember what actually did." Then I pressed play. The voicemail spilled into the center of the table like a slow-burning fuse. Mara's voice, sharp and casual all at once, recorded at 11:14 p.m. on a night she'd claimed she was home. Honestly, I don't know what Ethan sees in her. Sweet, sure, but temporary. He'll figure it out. He always does. Anyway, call me back. The guy at the bar keeps looking over, and Tyler thinks he knows him. The recording cut. Silence followed. No one breathed. Then the second half played automatically. A faint background laugh, unmistakably, Ethan's, followed by Mara's low hum of approval. I watched them one by one. Mara's face drained of color. Tyler's mouth fell open in small increments like a slow collapse. Ethan's shoulders folded inward. Leah closed her eyes, not in pain, but in confirmation. Finally, someone else could hear what she already knew. That, Mara started, voice shaking. That wasn't meant. It wasn't meant to be heard, I corrected, but it was meant. Tyler's chair screeched as he leaned forward. Okay, but context. It's your voice calling me replaceable, I said calmly. What's the context for that? No answer. None that would fit in the space between his breath and the truth. Ethan finally spoke. Avery, please, don't do this here. Where else? I asked softly. Where would honesty be more comfortable for you? He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His face answered for him anywhere but here, anywhere but now, anywhere but in front of witnesses. Mara tried again. You're twisting this. We joke like this with everyone. Not with each other's partners, I replied. Only with me. Leah whispered. She's right. It slipped out like instinct, like truth escaping containment. Tyler looked at her, betrayed. Leah, what the hell? She met his gaze steadily for the first time I'd ever seen. I'm tired, she said, of pretending. A second silence settled, thicker, heavier, the kind that announces a breaking point. I looked at Ethan next. You knew about the messages before they showed me. You laughed in the background of that voicemail. You stood there while they decided my value for me. He flinched, not dramatically, just enough to reveal everything. I didn't want things to get worse, he said quietly. They didn't get worse, I replied. They became visible. Mara's voice pitched high. So what, you came here to humiliate us? No, I said. I came here so the truth wasn't just happening in rooms I wasn't standing in. Leah exhaled shakily. The antique audio recorder's red light reflected in her eyes, making them shine with something like relief. Tyler attempted humor again, his last defense. So we're the villains now. Not villains, I said. Just exactly who you've shown yourselves to be. The waiter approached cautiously, sensing tension. Are you folks ready to order? No one moved. No one spoke. The silence answered for us. The waiter nodded slowly and retreated. Ethan leaned forward, voice cracking. Do you want to leave? We can talk privately. Fix this. Fix. The word landed wrong. Fix presumes something is bent, not broken. And what lay on this table wasn't bent. It was shattered. I don't want privacy, I said. I want honesty. Mara scoffed. Well, congratulations. You've made your point. No, I said quietly. I've made the truth visible. And the moment the words left my mouth, the hierarchy collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. Mara looked away first, then Tyler, then Ethan, who couldn't hold my gaze anymore. Leah was the only one still looking at me, steady, grounded. A witness, as required for this scene. The restaurant's ambient music played on, oblivious. The antique audio recorder glowed faint red behind me. The truth sat heavy in the air, no longer avoidable or ignorable. I stood, slowly, calmly, no theatrics, no accusations, just a quiet, decisive motion. I'm done, I said. Not with anger, with clarity. Clarity has a tone. It sounds like the end of something that needed to end. I walked away from the table, from the performance, from the pieces of a relationship built on silence and social convenience. Behind me, no one followed. Not Ethan, not Mara, Not Tyler. Only Leah whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Good." The truth had been spoken. Not in private, not in fragments, but in full view where shadows couldn't distort it anymore. The night after the restaurant confrontation didn't end with a slammed door or a dramatic exit. It ended with quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a truth so complete it doesn't need echoes to confirm it. I walked home alone, my steps steady, the cold air sharp enough to keep my pulse level. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and stood still for a long moment, letting the silence settle into my bones. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't replaying the scene. I wasn't wishing I'd said something different. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, my mind wasn't trying to manage anyone else's comfort. Morning came with soft gray light filtering through my blinds. My phone buzzed before I even sat up. 3 missed calls from Ethan, 2 from Tyler, 1 from Mara, and a long text from an unknown number that read like an apology written under duress. Then a final message from Leah simply asking if I was okay. I ignored the first 6. I answered the 7th. "I'm fine," I wrote. "Thank you." She responded with a single heart, simple and unintrusive. By late afternoon, I knew someone was going to show up. When the knock came, I wasn't surprised. It was soft at first, then more insistent. I pulled open the door to find Ethan standing there looking like someone trying to catch a train that had already left the station. He held his phone in his hand, screen-cracked today's required object. Not shattered, not broken beyond recognition, but spiderwebbed across the top corner in a way that made every attempt to swipe look like navigating fractured territory. I wondered absently if he'd dropped it when he ran out of the restaurant after I left. It would make sense. Guilt and urgency tend to make people clumsy. "Avery," he breathed, voice raw. "Please, can we talk?" I stepped aside. I wasn't going to make a scene in the hallway. But I didn't offer him a seat. He noticed. He closed the door quietly, holding his cracked phone like an anchor. "I didn't sleep," he said. "I kept thinking about everything that happened, everything you showed me." I watched him without speaking. He shifted his weight, visibly thrown by my stillness. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "I need you to know I'm sorry, not the kind of sorry people give when they're trying to win someone back. The real kind." His voice cracked on the last word. "I should have defended you. I should have shut them down. I should have told you the truth the first time you asked." I let the silence stretch. He filled it. "They were wrong," he said. "Cruel, unfair. I've known it for a long time, but I never pushed back because that group is where I've always belonged. Or I thought I did. I don't even know anymore." His fingers tightened around the cracked phone. "But I should have stood with you, not them." For a moment, his honesty, real honesty, softened something in me. But clarity doesn't reverse itself. It doesn't fold back into confusion because someone arrives late with sincerity. "You didn't just fail to defend me," I said. "You let their opinions shape how you saw me. And then you expected me to pretend the damage didn't matter." He inhaled sharply but didn't deny it. "I know. They called me replaceable," I continued, "and you acted like it was a joke because it was easier than facing what it meant." His face broke then, not dramatically, but in the quiet way people fall apart when they finally run out of places to hide. "I didn't think you'd ever leave," he said, voice low. "I thought we were stronger than that." "We were," I said, until I realized I was the only one holding the weight. He stared at the floor, jaw trembling. "I want to fix this." I shook my head gently. "You can't fix something you weren't protecting in the first place." He looked up, eyes shining, not with manipulation, but with grief. Real grief. "So that's it," he whispered. "It's over." I didn't answer right away. I crossed the room and picked up the small arrangement of evidence I'd laid out the night before, the folded shift record, the printed screenshot, the receipt, the torn envelope, the bank slip. I placed them all into a single folder, then walked back to him and handed it over. "This is what happened," I said. "Not the stories, not the jokes, not the excuses, the truth." He held the folder like it weighed more than paper. "Avery, you needed to see it before I walked away," I said. So you'd understand I'm not leaving because I'm hurt. I'm leaving because I'm awake." His breath shook. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Grow," I said softly, without using me as the lesson. He bowed his head, shoulders folding inward, a quiet, broken posture, not manipulative, not performative, just honest. It didn't change my decision, but it made me hope he'd someday treat the next person better. After a long pause, Ethan whispered, "I loved you. I still do. I believe you," I said. "But love isn't permission to stay asleep at the wheel." When he finally straightened, I saw resignation settle into his features, acceptance painful but genuine. He placed the cracked phone on my table, almost symbolic, as though acknowledging the fractured pattern he'd helped create. Then he stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for everything." "I know," I replied, "and I hope you mean it." He nodded once, then walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, not turning back for a last plea, just taking in the moment. Then he left. The door clicked softly behind him. Silence filled the room, but not the suffocating kind. This silence felt earned, cleansed. I sat on the edge of the couch, letting the quiet settle. My mind didn't replay the dinner scene or the evidence or the timeline. Instead, it drifted to simple things, the way the light hit the floor, the calm rhythm of my breathing, the steadiness in my chest where panic used to live. I didn't need triumph. I didn't need revenge. I needed integrity, and I finally had it my own. As the light dimmed through the window, I reached for a small blanket, wrapped it over my legs, and leaned back. The cracked phone sat on the table like a punctuation mark, a reminder that the truth had been spoken clearly enough to split something open that was never going to hold. Leah texted one more time. "Just checking on you." I typed back, "I'm okay." This time it was true. Tomorrow the group would fracture. Tomorrow they'd face the fallout of their own words. But tonight belonged to clarity. Tonight was the payoff. Morning light entered my apartment in soft, angled strips, warm, quiet, and nothing like the flickering, fractured beams that had followed me through every encounter with Ethan's friends. For the first time in weeks, the light didn't feel like judgment searching for a flaw. It felt like space, air, freedom shaped into brightness. I sat on the edge of my couch for a long time, simply letting the calm settle around me. The storm had already passed. The atmosphere no longer asked me to justify my presence in it. The empty frame, the required object for this final part, rested on the small table beside my window. I had placed it there sometime during the night, without thinking, probably when I cleared away the last traces of emotional clutter. Its wooden borders were smooth, unadorned, open. No photo inside, no memory trapped behind glass. Just potential. A placeholder for anything I chose to put there next. For once, I didn't feel the pressure to fill it. Present tense returned naturally, as though my perspective had shifted into something sharper and quieter at the same time. The room holds still around me, waiting without demand. I walk toward the window and touch the frame gently. The surface is cool under my fingertips, a clean edge without splinters. It feels like the opposite of everything Ethan's friends ever tried to make me believe about myself, unbroken, unreplaceable, unmoved by their assessments. Life feels different in this light. Not louder, not triumphant, just clear. My phone sits on the coffee table, silent except for one unread message from Leah checking in again. I don't read it yet. I'm not avoiding it. I just don't need anything external to ground me. I breathe in the still air of my apartment, feeling the steadiness of my chest, the unshaken pace of my heartbeat. Yesterday's confrontation replays in fragments, not with pain, but with clarity. The way the truth finally settled into the room. The way Mara's confidence shattered around the edges when faced with evidence she couldn't dismiss. The way Tyler's laughter collapsed into silence when his harmless jokes could no longer hide behind tone. The way Ethan's posture folded into itself when he realized silence can be an act of cruelty. None of it replays as regret. Only recognition. Recognition that I spent months trying to belong to people who never considered me part of anything except the background of their own dynamic. recognition that I mistook tolerance for acceptance, recognition that their opinions were never a measure of my worth, just a mirror reflecting their own smallness. I stand near the window, letting the sun warm one side of my face. Dust floats in the air, illuminated by the angled light. It reminds me of every moment reflections tried to warn me, reflections in doorways, in windows, in the surfaces of objects that caught what people didn't say aloud. I wasn't ready to listen then. I am now. Glass reflection steadies when the hidden angle is finally seen. The motif resolve settles into the moment, not dramatic, just true. Outside, the world carries on without noticing the shift in mine. People walk their dogs. Cars slip down the street. Someone jogs past with headphones in. Life isn't waiting for me to catch up. It's simply moving. And now I'm moving with it. I think of Ethan not with anger, but with the distant understanding that comes after clarity has cooled into acceptance. I hope he grows. I hope he learns to speak when silence hurts. I hope he builds friendships that don't rely on tearing someone else down to stay balanced. But those hopes aren't tied to me anymore. They belong to him alone. I don't check social media. I don't wonder what Mara and Tyler are saying today. Their hierarchy collapsed the moment truth entered the room, and whatever remains of their dynamic isn't mine to witness. Their opinions don't hold weight here. Not anymore. I lift the empty frame and hold it up to the light. It catches a thin line of brightness along its inner edge, outlining the space where something could go someday. A moment, a photograph, a memory I actually want to keep. But it doesn't need anything inside it right now. The empty space is honest, clean, full of possibility instead of expectation. I set the frame back down, steady and deliberate. Then I open the window a few inches. Cool air drifts in, carrying with it the faint scent of pine from the courtyard outside. The breeze feels soft against my skin, nothing like the sharp cutting winds of the past weeks. This one carries no judgment. Only breath, only beginnings. My phone buzzes softly again. Leah checking in once more. I smile, grateful for the steadiness of someone who stayed true without needing credit for it. I'll respond soon, not because I owe anyone reassurance, but because I'm choosing connection instead of collapse. I sit back on the couch with a blanket wrapped loosely around my legs, my mind quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. This isn't triumph. This isn't revenge. This isn't the victory they'll assume I wanted. This is clarity, and clarity is enough. I glance once more at the empty frame. It doesn't feel incomplete. It feels ready.